It was supposed to be a normal Saturday morning in Waukesha, Wisconsin, a quiet suburban town where children played freely, where parents trusted their kids to ride bikes down tree-lined streets, and where neighbors waved across their lawns. But on May 31st, 2014, that calm was shattered forever. In the woods at the edge of town, a 12-year-old girl stumbled from the trees, bleeding from 19 stab wounds, gasping for air, and begging for help. A passing cyclist saw her collapse on the side of the road, her body weak, her voice faint, but her will to live stronger than anyone could have imagined. This wasn't a random attack by strangers. This wasn't gang violence or a tragic accident. Her attackers were not adults. They weren't even teenagers. They were her best friends, two other 12-year-old girls. And when the police caught them, the reason behind the crime left even the most hardened detectives speechless. These children weren't chasing money, revenge, or power. They claimed they were trying to appease a creature from the internet, a faceless, shadowy figure known only as Slenderman. What unfolded next would become one of the most shocking and haunting juvenile crime cases in modern American history. It raised terrifying questions about friendship, mental illness, the power of the internet, and how far children can go when they believe in something unreal, but deadly. This is the true story of Morgan Geyser and Anissa Weier, the case that blurred the line between childhood fantasy and chilling reality. But before we unravel how two young girls carried out one of the most infamous attacks in the name of a fictional monster, make sure you're subscribed to Crime Vault, where we uncover the darkest true crime cases that leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. Trust me, you're going to want to stay until the end, because the twists in this story will leave you speechless. Morgan Geyser grew up in Waukesha, Wisconsin, the only child of a loving but somewhat unusual household. Her parents, though supportive, had quirks that set them apart from the typical suburban family. Morgan herself was bright, creative, and imaginative, but classmates often described her as different, socially awkward, sometimes withdrawn, and prone to immersing herself in fantasy. She was the kind of girl who preferred living in her own world rather than blending into the one around her. Doctors later revealed that Morgan struggled with undiagnosed early-onset schizophrenia. Even as a child, she heard voices, experienced hallucinations, and believed in things others dismissed as impossible. But at just 12 years old, no one had connected the dots. To her peers and teachers, she was simply eccentric. Anissa Weier, on the other hand, came from a more fractured background. Her parents were divorced, and Anissa often felt caught between two households. At school, she was described as quiet, lonely, and desperate to fit in. Unlike Morgan, who could at least retreat into her imagination, Anissa carried the weight of isolation heavily. She didn't have many close friends until she met Morgan. The two girls clicked instantly. Both outsiders, both misunderstood, both craving connection. They bonded over fantasy, internet stories, and their shared love for the eerie corners of online culture. And it wasn't long before they stumbled upon something that would change their lives forever. Slenderman. Slenderman wasn't real. He was a creation born on an internet forum called Something Awful back in 2009, designed for a Photoshop contest. The character, tall, faceless, dressed in a black suit with unnaturally long arms, was meant to haunt readers in short horror stories called creepypastas. But for impressionable kids like Morgan and Anissa, Slender Man became more than just a story. He became a presence. The two began spending hours consuming Slenderman lore, reading posts, watching videos, and immersing themselves in his mythology. For them, it wasn't just a scary story, it was a reality. They convinced themselves that Slenderman lived in a mansion deep in the Nicolet National Forest of Wisconsin. And more disturbingly, they began to believe that if they didn't prove their loyalty to him, he would come after their families. This shared delusion deepened their bond. What started as friendship morphed into something darker, a partnership built not on typical middle school secrets and sleepovers, but on paranoia, fear, and obsession. By the end of 2013, both girls believed they had a mission. They needed to become proxies, followers who served Slenderman. And to do that, they told themselves they had to make a sacrifice, a human sacrifice. And they already knew who their victim would be. Payton Isabella Leutner, known to friends and family as Bella, was everything Morgan and Anissa were not. Outgoing, friendly, and full of warmth, Bella had a natural charisma that drew people in. She and Morgan became friends in the 4th grade, and though their personalities were different, Bella had a soft spot for Morgan's quirks. She defended her against bullies, included her when others didn't, and often acted as the bridge between Morgan and the rest of the class. But Bella didn't know the storm brewing beneath her friend's surface. She had no idea that her kindness, her loyalty, and her trust would make her the chosen target of a nightmare. As Morgan and Anissa's obsession with Slenderman deepened, Bella became the name whispered in their secret conversations. The plan wasn't formed overnight. It grew gradually, piece by piece, over months of disturbing discussions. At first, it was an idea that seemed more like fantasy. What if we killed Bella to prove ourselves to Slenderman? But as weeks passed, the fantasy hardened into intent. Police documents later revealed chilling details. The girls had researched methods of killing. They searched online for terms like how to kill someone without them noticing, and quickest way to commit murder. They read about knives, pressure points, and the human body's vulnerabilities. These weren't the searches of children playing pretend. They were the marks of two 12-year-olds descending into delusion. Their plan took shape in stages. First, they would invite Bella to a sleepover. Everything would seem normal, just 3 friends celebrating a birthday, staying up late, talking, and playing games. Then, the next day, they would lure her into the woods at a local park, far from prying eyes. And that's where they would strike. But what's most unsettling is how methodical their plotting became. In their journals, later recovered by police, Morgan and Anissa wrote about the crime with chilling detachment. They debated the best time to attack. Should it be in the bathroom at Morgan's house while Bella slept, or in the park the following morning? They even discussed wearing masks, gloves, and hiding the body. And yet, in between these disturbing entries, they still wrote about the everyday things 12-year-olds cared about. Favorite songs, classmates, silly doodles. It was a chilling juxtaposition. Ordinary childhood scrawls laced with the seeds of murder. By May 2014, the plan was set. Bella trusted Morgan completely, and Anissa, though less close to her, seemed harmless enough. When Morgan invited Bella to a sleepover for her birthday, Bella said yes without hesitation. To her, it was just another night with friends. To Morgan and Anissa, it was the first step toward becoming proxies of Slenderman. The night of May 30th, 2014, began like any other sleepover. Pizza, games, playing with toys. At one point, the girls even roller skated around the basement, laughing and joking like normal kids. To Bella, everything felt safe. To Morgan and Anissa, it was cover. But sometime that night, when the other two believed Bella had drifted asleep, Morgan picked up a knife. The first chance had come, yet nerves overcame her, and the attack didn't happen. Anissa whispered to her to wait until the morning. And so they did. Bella woke the next day with no suspicion of the darkness surrounding her. She got dressed, ate breakfast, and followed her friends out the door. They told her they wanted to go to the park. She agreed, smiling. It was the kind of thing best friends did on a Saturday morning. She had no idea she was walking straight into an ambush. Saturday, May 31st, 2014. The morning sun rose gently over Waukesha, Wisconsin. It should have been an ordinary day for 3 middle school girls. Instead, it became the day that shook the entire nation. Morgan, Anissa, and Bella left the house together, telling Morgan's mother they wanted to play at David's Park, a wooded area nearby. To an outsider, it looked like 3 friends enjoying a weekend adventure. But inside the minds of Morgan and Anissa, the plan was crystal clear. They carried with them a kitchen knife, a blade nearly 5 inches long, hidden in Morgan's bag. This wasn't some impulsive moment. This was premeditated, rehearsed, and chillingly deliberate. At first, they suggested going to the park's bathroom. Their plan? To pin Bella against the wall and kill her there. But as soon as they stepped inside, fear gripped them. The space was too small, too close, too risky. People could hear. Bella noticed nothing, brushing it off as just part of the morning wanderings. The girls left the bathroom and walked deeper into the woods. That's when Anissa whispered to Bella, "Go lie down, it'll make you less hurt." Confused, Bella laughed nervously, but she trusted her friends. She laid on the grass, staring up at the blue Wisconsin sky. And then, in a moment that would scar her forever, Morgan climbed on top of her. She pulled out the knife. What followed was brutality that seemed unimaginable for children so young. Bella was stabbed 19 times. The blade punctured her arms, her legs, her torso. 2 wounds came frighteningly close to her heart and major arteries. Any deeper, and she would not have survived. As Bella screamed and fought, begging her friends to stop, the woods echoed with desperation. Yet Morgan and Anissa didn't stop. When it was over, Bella lay bleeding on the forest floor, her white shirt soaked in red. Morgan and Anissa told her they'd go get help, but that was a lie. Instead, they left her there, assuming she would die. But Bella wasn't finished. With every ounce of strength left in her small body, she dragged herself, inch by painful inch, through the forest. 19 stab wounds, blood loss, dizziness. But she refused to let it be the end. Somehow, miraculously, she crawled out of the trees and onto a bike path. It was there that a passing cyclist saw her. A man named Greg Steinberg spotted Bella, bloodied and collapsing, and called 911. His voice shook as he told dispatchers, "There's a girl, she's been stabbed. She needs help now." Paramedics rushed to the scene. Bella was pale, barely conscious, but alive. They stabilized her, applied pressure to her wounds, and raced her to the hospital. Surgeons later described her survival as nothing short of a miracle. 2 of the stab wounds missed her heart and major artery by less than a millimeter. Meanwhile, Morgan and Anissa were not at the hospital. They weren't waiting for updates. They were on the run. The two 12-year-olds, still carrying the knife, walked for miles along highways and back roads. Their destination? Nicolet National Forest, more than 200 miles away. Why? Because they believed Slender Man lived there. They thought if they could find him, they would be welcomed as his proxies and protected forever. For hours, they wandered, convinced their mission had been successful, convinced Bella was dead, convinced Slender Man was waiting for them. But by that time, Bella was fighting for her life in surgery, and the police were already searching for the two girls. It didn't take long for police to find them. Just hours after the stabbing, Waukesha authorities issued an alert for the missing 12-year-old girls. Officers canvassed the area, checking wooded trails and nearby highways. By late afternoon, a police officer spotted two figures walking near Interstate 94, their backpacks slung over their shoulders. It was Morgan Geyser and Anissa Weier. The girls looked exhausted, their clothes dirty from wandering the woods. In Morgan's backpack was the weapon, a 5-inch kitchen knife, its blade still carrying traces of Bella's blood. The arrest was swift. But what shocked investigators wasn't just that two preteens had carried out a nearly fatal stabbing. It was how calm they were about it. Anissa, trembling but cooperative, told officers, "We were trying to find Slender Man." Morgan? She seemed almost detached, even cheerful, as if she didn't fully grasp the gravity of what had happened. At the Waukesha Police Department, the interrogation rooms became the stage for one of the most haunting juvenile cases in modern American history. Investigators separated the girls. Each was placed in a stark room, with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, cameras recording their every move. Anissa broke first. In a soft, nervous voice, she confessed the plan had been in motion for months. She explained Slender Man, how they discovered him on the website Creepypasta, how they believed he was real, and how he could hurt their families if they didn't obey. "We had to do it," she said. "If we didn't, Slender Man would kill our families." She insisted she hadn't stabbed Bella, but admitted she had encouraged Morgan, pressured her, and guided the plan. Then came Morgan's interview. To the detective's surprise, Morgan spoke with little emotion, almost as if she were describing a normal day at school. She admitted she was the one who stabbed Bella. She even described the sound the knife made as it went into Bella's body. At one point, she giggled, not out of cruelty, but out of something far more unsettling, a detachment from reality. When asked why she did it, her answer was chilling. It was necessary. Slender Man wanted it. We had to prove ourselves. The detectives leaned in, confused and horrified. They pushed, asking if she really believed this figure was real. Morgan nodded. "He watches us. He lives in Nicolet National Forest. We had to go to him." For investigators, it became clear this wasn't just about a crime. This was about two children whose grip on reality had been warped by delusion and fear. Back at the hospital, Bella lay in critical condition. Surgeons worked tirelessly, and against all odds, she survived. When detectives later visited her, she was able to whisper enough to identify her attackers, Morgan and Anissa, her best friends. The evidence was undeniable. Bella's testimony, the knife, the confessions. The case that began as a bizarre mystery quickly solidified into something more concrete: attempted murder. But even as prosecutors prepared charges, a bigger question loomed. Were Morgan and Anissa truly evil? Or were they sick, lost in a dangerous fantasy they believed was real? And then another twist. Wisconsin law required children as young as 10 to be tried as adults in serious felony cases, including attempted murder. That meant two 12-year-old girls were now facing adult court, staring down decades in prison. The trial of Morgan Geyser and Anissa Weier unfolded like no other. By now, the facts were undisputed. Bella had been stabbed 19 times, and both girls had confessed. The real battle was over why they did it, and whether they could be held fully responsible. The world watched as two childhood friends, barely out of 6th grade, faced charges of first-degree attempted intentional homicide. In Wisconsin, that was an adult felony. A conviction could mean decades behind bars. The courtroom brimmed with tension when the final arguments began. The prosecution painted the girls as dangerous. They reminded the court of the careful planning, the deliberate lure into the woods, and the repeated stabbing. They argued that Morgan and Anissa knew right from wrong. They hid the knife. They lied to police at first. They ran from the scene. To prosecutors, that was proof enough. This wasn't just a delusion, it was a crime. The defense, however, clung to the psychiatric evidence. Morgan's schizophrenia, they argued, was so severe that she lived in a fractured reality. Anissa's gullibility made her a follower, not a leader. Both girls, they insisted, needed treatment, not punishment. And then, as the lawyers spoke their final words, the judge prepared to decide the fate of two children who had committed an adult crime. The verdict was a study in contrasts. In 2017, Anissa Weier accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to being a party to attempted second-degree homicide, but her case hinged on her mental state. A jury later found her not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect. Instead of prison, she was sentenced to 25 years in a mental health facility. Her parents wept as the judge explained. Anissa was not a hardened criminal, but a fragile mind caught in the shadow of a darker influence. For Morgan Geyser, the outcome was harsher. She pleaded guilty to attempted first-degree homicide, but also claimed insanity. Unlike Anissa, her diagnosis of schizophrenia was undeniable and well-documented. In 2018, the judge ruled she too was not guilty by reason of mental disease. But because of the severity of her illness and her central role in the stabbing, Morgan was sentenced to 40 years in a secure psychiatric institution. Two lives, forever bound together in a crime that shook America, received different but equally heavy fates. When the sentences were read, silence filled the courtroom. On one side, Bella's family wrestled with relief that justice had been served, but also with the bitter truth that their daughter's life would never be the same. On the other, the families of Morgan and Anissa broke down. Their daughters were alive, but gone, locked away, their futures rewritten. And then came Bella herself, the survivor. Against all odds, she not only lived but thrived. She returned to school, pursued her passions, and eventually spoke publicly about resilience and forgiveness. But the scars, physical and emotional, remained as daily reminders of the nightmare she endured. This case split public opinion. Some saw the verdicts as merciful, a recognition that mental illness had driven the crime. Others saw injustice, that two nearly killers avoided prison because of legal technicalities. But everyone agreed on one thing. The Slenderman case wasn't just about a meme. It was about the fragile minds of children, the dangers of untreated mental illness, and the blurry line between fantasy and reality in the digital age. Yet, even after sentencing, questions lingered. Could this have been prevented if warning signs had been taken more seriously? Could treatment, education, or parental intervention have stopped the delusion before it turned violent? And most hauntingly, what would become of Morgan and Anissa after decades inside psychiatric walls? Would they heal, or would the shadow of Slenderman follow them forever? The verdicts were handed down. Morgan Geyser and Anissa Weier would not spend their lives in prison, but instead behind the walls of psychiatric institutions. Yet the story of the Slenderman stabbing didn't end inside that courtroom. It echoed far beyond, reshaping lives, families, and even the internet itself. For Bella, the survivor, recovery was both physical and emotional. Doctors performed multiple surgeries to repair the damage caused by the 19 stab wounds. Each scar carried a memory of the woods, of betrayal, of pain that no child should ever endure. Yet Bella's resilience became a symbol of hope. She went back to school, gradually reclaiming her independence. Friends and teachers described her as strong, determined, and wise beyond her years. But even as she smiled, the trauma lingered. Bella later admitted she struggled with anxiety and trust issues. After all, the girls who nearly ended her life weren't strangers. They were her best friends. Still, Bella's story became one of survival, a reminder that even in the darkest tragedies, light can break through. For Anissa Weier, the years after sentencing were complex. She entered a mental health facility at just 15 years old. Isolated from her peers, she spent her teenage years in treatment, therapy, and under constant observation. Reports from psychologists described her as highly suggestible, prone to fantasy, and terrified of abandonment. Yet, as the years passed, Anissa showed progress. In 2021, after nearly 7 years of confinement, she petitioned for release. She argued she was no longer a threat to society and had learned to manage her mental health. Against public outcry, the court agreed, granting her conditional release into community supervision with strict monitoring. Some saw this as a second chance. Others feared history might repeat itself. For Morgan Geyser, the path was even heavier. Diagnosed with schizophrenia, her delusions were more severe and persistent. Doctors reported she often spoke of voices, paranoia, and visions. Unlike Anissa, Morgan's recovery was slower, more complicated. In the courtroom, she once apologized to Bella and her family, her words laced with both sorrow and confusion. "I never meant for this to happen. I don't know why." Morgan remained confined to a psychiatric facility, with her 40-year sentence stretching well into adulthood. Her future remained uncertain. Would she ever be stable enough to re-enter society, or would she live her life within hospital walls? The families of all 3 girls carried wounds of their own. Bella's parents endured the nightmare of almost losing their daughter. Morgan's and Anissa's families faced guilt, shame, and scrutiny, accused by some of not noticing the warning signs. Interviews later revealed their heartbreak, loving their daughters, but haunted by what they had done. It was a tragedy that did not stop at the woods. It rippled outward, forever changing 3 families who once shared birthday parties and school dances. Beyond the personal, the cultural impact was enormous. The Slender Man stabbing forced America to confront uncomfortable truths about childhood, the internet, and mental health. Parents began asking new questions. How much influence do online myths have on children? Can young minds distinguish between fantasy and reality in the digital age? Are schools, doctors, and families doing enough to catch early signs of mental illness? Even the creator of Slenderman, Eric Knudsen, was shaken. What started as a fictional horror meme on the internet had spiraled into real-world violence. Knudsen expressed sorrow for the tragedy, though he could not have foreseen his creation fueling such darkness. The internet itself came under scrutiny. Sites that hosted creepypasta stories faced backlash. Psychologists warned of the dangers of digital folklore on impressionable children. The case became a cautionary tale. Stories may be fictional, but their impact on vulnerable minds can be devastatingly real. In schools and communities, the story sparked new conversations about mental health. Educators began emphasizing early detection, counseling, and digital literacy. Parents were urged to talk openly with their children about what they see online. Lawmakers debated reforms to better balance juvenile justice with psychiatric treatment. The Slender Man stabbing wasn't just a crime, it was a wake-up call. And yet, more than a decade later, the case still leaves unanswered questions. Could anyone have stopped it before it happened? Could Morgan's schizophrenia have been diagnosed earlier? Could Anissa's parents have recognized her dangerous dependency on fantasy? And what about Bella? What does forgiveness look like when the people who hurt you were the people you trusted most? The story of Morgan Geyser and Anissa Weier is not only about a crime, it is about the fragile line between innocence and horror, between childhood play and deadly obsession. It is a story of survival, of mental illness, of friendship turned fatal. But perhaps the most chilling truth is this: the shadows that led 3 girls into the woods that day are not gone. They linger in our communities, on our screens, in the silent struggles of children who feel unseen. The Morgan Geyser and Anissa Weier case demonstrates the devastating intersection of untreated mental illness, peer influence, and online culture. Legally, the courts had to determine whether 2 children, both just 12 years old at the time, understood the weight of their actions. Psychologically, exposure collided in a catastrophic way. Morgan's diagnosis of early-onset schizophrenia and Anissa's susceptibility to manipulation painted a chilling picture of how fragile young minds can be when external factors go unchecked. The crime was not simply about violence. It was about how mental health, environment, and unchecked digital. The moral lesson here is that evil does not always look like the monsters we imagine. Sometimes it hides in vulnerable children shaped by fear, delusion, or influence. This story teaches us that empathy, communication, and awareness are just as important as discipline when raising young people. It also reminds us that ignoring warning signs, whether in behavior or mental health, can allow small problems to escalate into irreversible tragedies. parents play a critical role in prevention. Greater awareness of Morgan's mental health struggles, paired with earlier medical intervention, might have redirected her path. For Anissa, closer parental monitoring of her online activities and stronger emotional guidance could have reduced her vulnerability to extreme beliefs. Both girls needed consistent mental health support, open conversations about digital safety, and stronger boundaries to help distinguish reality from fiction. On a broader level, society must prioritize children's mental health. Schools should be equipped to identify early warning signs and provide counseling resources. Communities need to normalize seeking help for psychiatric concerns without stigma. Finally, the digital world must be navigated carefully. Parents, teachers, and even tech platforms must collaborate to ensure children aren't left to interpret dangerous online myths alone. Education on media literacy, combined with safe online spaces, could prevent similar tragedies in the future. And yet, this is not the end, because years after sentencing, new developments would emerge. Appeals, petitions for release, shifting public opinion. What happened to Anissa after her release? What became of Morgan in long-term treatment? And how did Bella's life continue to unfold in the face of lingering trauma? The answers and the shocking twists that followed will be revealed in Part 2. Do you want me to continue Part 2? Drop your answers in the comment section.